The story begins with an image that sent shockwaves through women's basketball. Playoff tickets for the WNBA selling for as little as $5. Not 20, not 10, 5. A number so insulting it felt like a slap in the face to decades of players who fought for relevance, recognition, and respect. But beyond embarrassment, this collapse raised a deeper question. How did the league go from celebrating record-breaking attendance months earlier to essentially begging fans to fill seats at the lowest possible price? And why was Caitlin Clark's absence at the very center of this controversy? The moment those discounted prices hit headlines, the whispers began. Critics asked, is the WNBA really a strong product, or is it just riding the coattails of one young superstar? Every empty row, every bargain basement ticket, became ammunition for those eager to undermine the league's progress. But what truly ignited the firestorm was not the prices themselves. It was the way Caitlin Clark, the league's newest phenom, responded. Her reaction wasn't silence. It was sharp, almost mocking, and directed toward none other than Sue Bird, a legend she seemed ready to challenge. For many fans, Clark's attitude felt refreshing. They saw her words not as arrogance, but as the blunt truth everyone else was too scared to say. Sue Bird, the face of WNBA respectability for 2 decades, had gone after Stephen A. Smith on ESPN, accusing him of disrespecting the league when he pointed to the data. But Clark? She doubled down. The numbers didn't lie, and she knew it. Ratings without her had collapsed. Ticket sales without her had collapsed. The entire league, she implied, was leaning on her shoulders more than anyone wanted to admit. What made the situation even more combustible was the generational clash it represented. Sue Bird, with her rings, gold medals, and legacy, symbolized tradition and loyalty to the WNBA. Caitlin Clark, with her brash confidence, enormous following, and transformative impact, symbolized a revolution. One represented the past, built slowly brick by brick. The other represented the future, skyrocketing to stardom in just months. And when Clark appeared to mock Bird's insistence on protecting the league's image, it wasn't just words. It was a torch being ripped from one generation's hand to another's in front of millions. This wasn't just about sports anymore. It was about power, pride, and survival. Clark wasn't mocking Sue Bird as a person. She was mocking the old guard's refusal to face reality, that the league's financial stability, media relevance, and very survival had been tied directly to her presence. And if the veterans couldn't accept that, Clark seemed willing to rub their faces in the truth. $5 tickets weren't just a market correction. They were a metaphor for a league exposed, stripped of the illusion of strength once the phenomenon known as Caitlin Clark exited the stage. The battleground for this drama wasn't the hardwood, but an ESPN studio. Under bright lights, Stephen A. Smith faced off against Sue Bird, and the sparks flew instantly. He presented the facts as he always does, raw and unfiltered. Ratings without Clark were a disaster. The playoffs, usually the crown jewel of the season, looked like an afterthought without her name attached. But Sue Bird bristled, her voice cutting through the tension. She accused Smith of tearing down the very league ESPN was supposed to support. The emotion in her words revealed more than frustration. It revealed fear. Bird wasn't just defending the WNBA as an analyst. She was defending her life's work. For decades, she had been part of the foundation, brick by brick, player by player, building a league from near obscurity into national relevance. To hear someone like Stephen A. Smith recite numbers that suggested all of that work meant little compared to one rookie, it was unbearable. Her rebuttal wasn't calculated. It was emotional, fiery, desperate. She saw disloyalty, a betrayal of everything she and her peers had sacrificed for. To her, the narrative threatened to erase years of struggle and progress. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't backing down. His voice carried the kind of authority that comes from speaking unvarnished truths, even when they're ugly. "What do you want me to do, lie?" He shot back. The words echoed to the studio like a gunshot. He wasn't attacking the WNBA. He argued. He was reporting reality. The ratings weren't speculation. The ticket sales weren't rumor. They were fact. And facts, in his eyes, couldn't be dismissed with emotion. If Sue Bird wanted to challenge a perspective, she'd need a counter with evidence, not just indignation. That's when the debate turned nuclear. The studio fell silent as the clash escalated. What was supposed to be another lively sports debate had transformed into something far more raw. This wasn't just about Caitlin Clark or playoffs. It was a collision between journalism and public relations, between unflinching truth and carefully constructed image, between a league desperate to appear strong and a broadcaster unwilling to sugarcoat its struggles. Millions of viewers watched as Bird and Smith squared off, exposing the WNBA's deepest insecurities live on air. The mask slipped, and suddenly everyone could see what lay beneath: fear of fragility. Behind this fiery studio debate stood Caitlin Clark herself. Even though she wasn't in the room, her absence was the subject of the numbers, her presence the ghost haunting every word. During the regular season, Clark had drawn 1.7 million viewers per game, a 240% leap from previous years. Cities across the country sold out arenas to watch her, even when she was the visiting player. Merchandise sales exploded, sponsorships multiplied, and Indiana fever attendance spiked by over 13,000 per game. Clark wasn't just a player. She was the engine driving the WNBA. And now she was gone. When Indiana was eliminated from the playoffs, the illusion collapsed. The Caitlin Clark effect wasn't just hype. It was measurable, undeniable, and devastating once removed. At the Target Center in Minnesota, tickets were being sold for as little as $10. For the finals, the supposed pinnacle of the league's competition, resale tickets dipped to $9. $9. The numbers were humiliating, and they weren't just a financial issue. They were a perception problem. If the WNBA couldn't fill arenas for its most important games without Clark, what did that say about its long-term health? Television ratings told an equally grim story. With Clark out, viewership dropped by nearly 70%. Not 10%, not 20%, 70. Matchups featuring decorated veterans and household names barely attract a fraction of Clark's audiences. It was proof that fans weren't flocking to the WNBA out of loyalty to the league itself. They were flocking to Caitlin Clark specifically. Her elimination wasn't just the end of Indiana's season. It was the end of the league's momentum. Overnight, the WNBA went from a cultural phenomenon to a struggling brand trying to hide its collapse. And everyone could see it happening. Sue Bird's response was to challenge the narrative. She argued that Clark's playoff numbers were being exaggerated, pointing out that Indiana never hosted a postseason game without Clark's home crowd. She said it was unfair to assume the entire playoffs hinged on her absence. To Bird, the league deserved patience, respect, and unwavering support. Clark was a star, yes, but she was just one part of a bigger whole. Her words sounded like loyalty, but to many fans, they sounded like denial, a refusal to admit that the league's future had already been tied to one young rookie. The tension wasn't just professional, it was personal. Behind Bird's insistence lay an unspoken truth: insecurity. She had spent her life carrying the WNBA through its darkest years, only to see a 22-year-old rookie become its savior overnight. For veterans, the resentment was palpable. Diana Taurasi warned Clark early with her infamous "reality is coming" quote, while Cheryl Swoops publicly downplayed her accomplishments. The message was clear. Clark wasn't going to be celebrated with open arms. She was going to be tested, doubted, and reminded that the league belonged to others long before her arrival. Those warnings soon turned physical. The infamous Kennedy Carter flagrant foul wasn't just a hard play, it was a statement. Clark was targeted not because of her game, but because of everything she represented: media attention, sponsorships, and cultural relevance that veterans never enjoyed. To many fans, it looked like hazing disguised as competition, a bitter welcome from players who felt overshadowed. Clark was no longer just a rookie trying to adjust. She was walking into a league determined to humble her, to remind her that fame didn't buy respect, and that the old guard still guarded the gates. But fans saw through it. They saw legends clinging to pride, doubling down on criticism, and refusing to acknowledge the reality unfolding before their eyes. Clark had brought in millions of new fans, sponsors, and revenue streams. Yet instead of embracing her, veterans seemed to resent her. To supporters, it felt like jealousy. To critics, it felt like the WNBA sabotaging itself by attacking its own golden goose. Instead of celebrating the change she brought, the league seemed stuck in denial, and as ticket prices collapsed, that denial grew harder to defend. Reality was catching up brutally. The WNBA's leadership now faced a nightmare scenario. The postseason, meant to showcase the league at its strongest, had turned into a national embarrassment. Cameras panned across empty rows during finals broadcasts. Social media mocked the fire sale ticket prices. Sponsors whispered concerns about wasted investments. Networks eyed the numbers nervously, wondering if billion-dollar rights deals were built on shaky ground. The league scrambled for solutions, but the moves looked desperate. Ticket prices were slashed across arenas, not to attract true demand, but to create an illusion. From the outside, it looked like a thriving product. Inside, it was smoke. It was theater, not success. The WNBA didn't want fans to see its weakness, so it covered it with optics. Packed arenas on TV, bargain tickets in reality. It was the oldest trick in the book, but it fooled no one paying attention. The deeper truth remained unsolved. The league's newfound audience wasn't loyal to the WNBA. It was loyal to Caitlin Clark. And with her out of the picture, the cracks were too obvious to ignore. The league wasn't celebrating organic growth. It was staging a cover-up, masking fragility while veterans and executives fought to protect their pride. Through all of this, Caitlin Clark herself never lashed out. She didn't rant on social media, clap back at critics, or dwell on resentment. She kept playing basketball at a high level, ignoring the chaos swirling around her. Fans noticed. They admired her focus. While veterans obsessed over legacy and optics, Clark seemed to care only about the game. In her silence, she said more than words ever could. While the WNBA fought over its identity, she was already building her own legacy, one basket at a time. And that contrast made her power even more undeniable. As the storm unfolded, an even deeper tension emerged, one that went beyond stats, egos, or even generations. It was about culture, identity, and race. For decades, the WNBA had been defined by black athletes who fought not just for championships, but for recognition and justice in a society that often ignored them. They weren't just players. They were activists, pioneers, icons. And then, suddenly, Caitlin Clark appeared. A white rookie from Iowa. Her stardom exploded overnight, eclipsing media attention and sponsorship opportunities veterans had fought for their entire careers. To some, it felt like proof of long-standing inequality. This undercurrent of resentment wasn't always spoken aloud, but it hung in the air. Why had decades of black stars, with all their brilliance and advocacy, never received this level of coverage? Why was it only now, with Clark at the center, that women's basketball had broken into mainstream conversation? The tension wasn't simply jealousy. It was pain, frustration, and disappointment at a system that seemed to reward differently depending on who was holding the spotlight. Clark wasn't responsible for creating that divide, but she became the lightning rod for it, absorbing the frustration of an entire generation. And yet, even within this tension, there was contradiction. Sue Bird herself had once praised Clark openly, calling her a generational talent who could lift the entire league. She said a rising tide lifts all boats. But when Stephen A. Smith highlighted Clark's dominance as fact, Bird seemed to recoil, dismissing the very narrative she had once supported. Why the sudden change? Some say it was fear that the league had become too dependent on one player. Others say it was insecurity, that the work of veterans like Bird felt diminished when compared to Clark's instant, unprecedented impact. The paradox is hard to ignore. Clark is both the WNBA's blessing and its curse. She brings ratings, revenue, and cultural relevance the league has chased for decades. But her dominance also exposes insecurities, resentments, and the fragility of a league that has struggled to build collective star power. Without her, the postseason collapsed. With her, the league soars. She is both savior and scapegoat, championed by fans and targeted by critics. And through it all, she keeps rising, her influence undeniable, her presence reshaping not just a game, but the identity of the WNBA itself. That is Caitlin Clark's paradox. She didn't just join the WNBA. She became its symbol, its centerpiece, its test. The ticket price collapse wasn't just about economics. It was a reflection of the league's deeper truth, that without Clark, the WNBA still struggles for relevance. With her, it shines brighter than ever. And so the question becomes unavoidable. Will the league embrace this revolution, or will it keep resisting, clinging to pride while the future slips away? Because one thing is certain, Caitlin Clark has already changed everything. The only question left is whether the WNBA can change with her.